Welcome to Building Harmonica Technique, a comprehensive study of harmonica technique and blues soloing concepts. My name is David Barrett, the author of the Harmonica Masterclass Lesson Series. Within this single video series, you will learn everything pertinent to the studying blues harmonica player. Not only will major topics be covered, but also the minute details that lead to the mastery of this instrument. Each video will cover a specific grouping of ideas. In some cases, an idea will start in one video and complete in another. The reason for this is that there are many different levels of technique, and mastery of another technique might be required to complete an idea. For the fullest understanding of all the techniques, I recommend viewing all 4 videos within the series. The topics covered in these videos are supported by Harmonica Masterclass books and CDs in the lesson series. Refer to the back of this video for details about the entire Harmonica Masterclass series. If you have any questions regarding this book or any other books within the line or the videos, look at the Harmonica Masterclass website at www.harmonicamasterclass.com or contact us by mail at P.O. Box 1723, Morgan Hill, California 95038. Okay, let's get started. Phrasing Part 1, 12-bar blues construction. The question and answer is something we're going to talk about at first. How we solo as musicians, we have notes, we have scales that are made from those notes, and those notes and scales go above this 12-bar blues progression that we work within. And with that 12-bar blues progression, we have the chords that the band is playing. Now, when we solo, we have to have some type of organization of those notes. And what we're going to talk about is like questions and answers, just like we'd use when talking to somebody. If I say, "How was your day?" and it hangs. The idea is it's not finished until somebody answers it. "My day was fine." Okay, we're relieved. Conversation's over. People can go their ways. The same type of idea happens when we solo. So how do we create questions, answers, statements, turnarounds? How do we move the listener to different places? Let's start with the simplest form of phrasing. That's the question. Now, a question that specifically goes away from our root. If we look at the board, we have a C harmonica. We're playing in the key of G, which would be second position. G is our root note. So what we're going to do is we're always going to resolve to G, our 2-draw, 6-blow, 9-blow. So remember, wherever you go, if you need to resolve, if you need to answer a question or finish some other type of phrase, you're going to resolve down to G. Now, the other notes available, B, D, F, we're going to use those as resting spots away from G. Basically, that's the question. We're going to go away, and we're going to come back to G. That's going to be our answer. Let's not think about the BDF just right as of yet. Let me give you examples of what the question sounds like. I can't stop there, can I? There's this yearning to finish it with something. Answer. So question, answer. Very interesting, isn't it? I'm going to do just a little solo to give you a little peek about what we're going to talk about in this video. Did you hear those questions and answers? That's how phrasing is done. Now, let's specifically talk about the notes within this one chord we're going to use for the questions. Let's go ahead and start with D. In music, the root and the fifth are the most important notes, or the most important chords. So if we think of the 1 chord, 5 chord, or what is the 1 chord, where it's the first note of the scale that we're working within, and then the 5 chord would be the 5th note of the scale. So we're on G, G, A, B, C, D, and that's the chord. Now, if we're going to start with the idea of finishing on D, remember, it doesn't matter what note you start with, it's what note you end with on a question. So I'm going to go ahead and end with D, pause, I'm going to come back down to G. So D would be 4-draw. So for this example, I'm going to go ahead and use 4-draw. Okay, listen for that note. There's 4-draw D. 2-draw G. Give you another example. 4-draw D and 2-draw answer. You can definitely hear the answer. Let me try now 1-draw. You see how well that works? Now, let's go ahead and move to another note. D is definitely the strongest note of agreement that we can use. Let's try B. B would be the second most. Now, I want you to use your own ears to get a sense of what that 3-draw does for us. So 3-draw B. Okay, listen real carefully. It was a little bluesier, wasn't it? So the idea is we're setting it up, kind of hold. It doesn't have that strong of a feel of question as D did, but it definitely set up that feel. Now let me give you another example. What about F? That's our 7th in the chord. So we can go ahead and use the 7th, and that'll also give us a sense of a question. So let me go ahead and use 2-draw bend or 5-draw. There's F. That works pretty well too. Now let me go ahead and try 5-draw. Notice how all those are resolved to 2-draw. Every single one you really get a sense of question and answer. Okay, let's now talk about question and answer phrasing. If we look at the board here, we've got 1 measure, 2nd measure, 3rd measure, 4th measure, and let's use these block diagrams to give us an idea of where those placements can be. Now, assuming you're going to use these notes within the chord, whether it's 3-draw, 4-draw, or 5-draw, or those notes that are available, we're going to go ahead and make some questions and answers. I do want to make a small point about using those chord tones, though. On the chord tones, you don't have to necessarily play a question on a note that is in a chord tone, but it doesn't have the same sense or strength of question. I'll give you an example. Here's a note that uses, or a note that's not in the chord. Let me just think of something here. 5-blow. Still works, doesn't it? But is it as strong as this? That was much stronger using the D. So if you want some notes to start with, use your 1 chord. G is your root, what you'll finish with. B is your 3rd. D is your 5th. F is your 7th. Remember, the idea of a question is moving away from your root, whatever it might be, even if it's not within the chord, and then coming back to your root, which would be 2-draw, 6-blow, or 9-blow. Okay, let's look at the board. Now, a question can be 1 measure, and the answer. Usually, questions and answers are symmetrical, meaning that if you have a 1-measure question, you're going to have a 1-measure answer, most commonly. So let's hear an example of that. Here's a question, 1 measure. 1, 2, 3. One measure question. Answer. Now, if we do a 1-measure question and a 1-measure answer, we can go ahead and repeat it right here. So let's do the same question here, and let's do the same answer here. Let's hear it. 1, 2, 3. That works pretty well. Now, we also have another place. If we want to go ahead and do a question and answer here, we can also do it there. So let's go ahead and place a question and answer here. We have now taken up all of our placements of the one chords that we have a two-measure block. So two measures, what does a question and an answer make? A phrase. So here's one phrase, and one phrase. Are there two other places? Is there another place where the one chord happens for two measures? Answer is no. So we can go ahead and use this theme right here. Let's go ahead and listen to it with the music. One, two, ready, go. Four chord. Here we come. So we can do a one-measure question, one-measure answer for a two-bar phrase. Now, if we can do a one-measure question and one-measure answer, and I said that phrasing is symmetrical, why can't we do a two-measure question and a two-measure answer? We can. Let's go ahead and look at that. So basically, we're just doubling the time that it takes to create that phrasing. Let's think about a two-measure phrase. It's got to be a little bit longer. The notes have to be a little more drawn out. So let's think here. We'll go for the same speed. 1, 2, 3. That's actually probably a little bit too long, but I think you get the idea. It needs to be a little bit longer and maybe add a little bit more to it. Let's go ahead and try a two-measure question and a two-measure answer. Okay, get ready. 1, 2, 3. Did you hear that? That's our four-bar question. Two-draw, that's our answer. Is it as simple as just changing the last note to make a question and answer? Yeah. For this example, I finished with four-draw. On the answer, I can simply get rid of the four-draw and go right to the two. Instead of going to the four, I can go to the two. It's a very simple idea on how to work with question and answers. So you can actually just change the very last note to make it an answer. And what do you finish with? Two-draw. Now something happens with this. Two-measure question, two-measure answer. We need four measures, don't we? Is there any other place where there's the four measures that happen? No. So what we have is this that happens here can't happen anywhere else if we're to follow the chord changes. We're going to look a little bit later on how we can fudge a little bit on that. Let's talk about one more idea here. What if I did a one-measure question, repeated that question, and did a two-measure answer? Does that follow the theme of being symmetrical? Yeah, it does. Because still the question spot is taking up two measures, and the answer spot is taking up two measures. So let's go ahead and look at the answer. The answer itself is probably going to be a little bit of a repeat of these two questions. Let me give you an example. Notice how the first part of it was actually this note for note, but I just kept on going? So listen. 1, 2, 3. Move on. Now, something that we can do is, what's happening is there's a chord change happening very soon. So the chord change itself, let's move this over here. The chord change itself is the four chord next, right? So when doing the four chord, maybe we want to set up that change. Remember when we were listening to 12-bar blues earlier in the tapes? That we heard bum, ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. There's the drums. Bum, ba-dum, 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 bum, sh-da-ga-da-ga-ga-da-ga, four chord. So each musician is telegraphing that chord change in some way. Well, we can do the same idea. So let's use that same idea and put some type of tail here. Now, what is a tail? A tail is actually another question that's very, very short. So what happens is ba-doo-ba-dwa-da, ba-doo-ba-da-da, ba-doo-ba-da-ba-da-ba-boo-da. Answer is ba-da-ba-doo. And this little tiny piece that says, I'm not done yet. Let me use the same example. You hear that? That's 2 draw bend F. That's our 7th if we're thinking of the 1 chord. So I asked just a little bit of a question to help me set up our 4 chord. Let's go ahead and play it with an example. Okay, we're right here. Okay, get ready. 1, 2, red, go. Notice how nicely that set up the 4 chord? Okay, let's talk about our 4 chord. Now, on the 4 chord itself, we have something we have to think about a little bit here. We have a chord change. Well, the chord change also brings new notes with it. So should we actually change how we work with our questions and answers? A little bit, but we're going to wait just a minute before we go in to analyze what exactly happens on the 4 chord. What we're basically going to do is treat the 4 chord as the same as we did here, but you have to understand that you can't answer a question within the 4 chord. What you can do is you can answer it when the 1 chord returns. Let me talk a little bit about a statement. Now, a statement can happen on the 1 chord and very commonly on the 4 chord. Now, a statement, I'm going to put it on this 1 chord right here. The statement itself is really not a question or an answer. It's actually a question and an answer combined together, but because they're so close together, you can't hear the relationship very well. So a statement might be, well, if I was to separate it, question, answer. It's hard to say that just one note can create the answer. It's really a statement. That would be a statement. Now let's go ahead and try the statement on the 4 chord. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put another question here and put an answer right after it. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to abbreviate what just first happened. So question, question, 2-measure answer, statement, statement. And I want you to listen how the first note of this question on the 1 chord is really going to sound like the answer to those 2 statements. So if we were to go a little bit more broad in our thinking, the 4 chord is kind of a question, a chord question that answers when the 1 chord returns. So don't necessarily think of the 4 chord as something you can go up and do a question and answer it. The answer really happens here. Let's listen to an example of it. Okay, 2 measures. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3. So the example you just heard, that really wasn't a question. It was actually more of an answer, but it's really a statement. Because it resolves itself in a sense. Do you hear how that lick, even though it's a statement, doesn't really resolve until I play that be-da-da-ba? So these 2 statements are then answered on the 1 chord. Let's also talk about pickups. Now what a pickup is, when that lick, actually the lick I just played was, this was 3-3. Well, what happened before this measure? That's a pickup. Now pickups generally happen a beat and a half early. It'd be 1, 2, 3. Ba-da-da-da-ba. Again. 1, 2, 3. And 4 and a 1, 1. And what the pickup is sometimes the lick itself might be a little bit drab. That worked okay, but what if I add a pickup? Da-doo-doo-dwa-dwa, ba-doo-doo-dwa-dwa. See how the pickup works? Now, mostly the reason why I'm bringing this up is when you learn licks, you're going to learn it with the pickup because it kind of belongs to that lick. But what if you listen to a lick, you learn it, but you don't necessarily apply it to the chord that it belongs? Say you didn't practice it right away. Well, a lot of players will try to start it right on 1 because we're used to going 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. Ba-doo-ba-dwee-dwee. I just ran out of time. So you got to remember that a lot of licks actually happen before this first measure. A 1, 2, 3. Ba-da-da-la. Ba-da-la. Now with the lick. So it actually helps telegraph that note change, and it works pretty well. Now, let's talk about the turn. Now, the turn is somewhat like a pickup, but the idea of a turn is, let's separate these questions and answers a little bit. Really, these phrases that we're doing are somewhat blocked in the sense of ba-doo-ba-dat, ba-doo-ba-dat, and then if we're to do this right, we'd want a space here as well. Ba-doo-ba-da-ba-da-ba. There's spaces in between these licks. And what we can do is we can add little connector licks or turns to help make our phrases go a little bit smoother. Do you hear what I did? 1 draw, 2 blow, 2 blow, 1 draw. So really what it is, I put this little underlining rhythm right here on these pieces. Give you an example again. Now let me put the little pieces in there. Works pretty nice, doesn't it? You can use any type of little bending pattern or any type of little repeated phrase. And in general, it needs to be repeated to work. You want to have these little pieces because, again, something I'm going to stress a lot is you want the listener to be able to follow the ideas that you're doing. So if you go ba-doo-ba-da, 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 they're hearing ba-doo-ba-da. They're going to start humming along with you. And that's kind of our goal, is to really bring the listener into the music. Otherwise, if you're playing music that no one knows where you're going, you're going to have no relationship with your listener. The 4 chord. Let's talk about the relationship of the 4 chord compared to the 1 chord. Now, so far on the 1 chord, we played the G, B, D, and the F, and we had the G blues scale that came with it. Now, for the 4 chord, we have C, E, G, B flat. That's the chord that happens here. So should we use a C blues scale on the 4 chord? No, not necessarily. We still want to represent the chords at least with their roots or their fifths. For the C chord, that would be C or G, root or fifth. And for the D chord, that would be D or A. But actually, the scale we're going to use is going to be the G blues scale. There's a specific reason for that. The G blues scale happens to embody most of the notes that are in the 4 chord anyways. Let me take this over here and show you how the notes in the G blues scale we have represented, or we have a lot of the C blues scale represented in the G blues scale. Okay, let's look at G, G. Let's just take off these notes so that we know we've used them. B flat, B flat, that's in common. We have C, Well, there's our C's. Let's take those off. What about D flat? Well, actually, we're comparing this scale to this scale. E flat is not there, so we need to leave that there. F, there it is. Let's take off the F. So, looking at the C blues scale, out of the 7 notes in the G blues or the C blues scale, actually 6 notes if we don't count the octave, we only have 2 notes that are left over that aren't represented already in the G blues scale. So what's going to happen is, when we go to the 4 chord, we're still going to use the G blues scale. But what we're going to want to go ahead and do is represent the root note or some of the other notes that are within that 4 chord. So example, C or G, the root of the 5th. Well, that's easy. That's 2 draw or 6 blow for our G, or 1 blow or 4 blow for our C. Now, you don't necessarily have to think that way. Your ear is already going to tell you to play those notes. You'll go to the chord and you'll find, wow, the C works real well. The C is also in the G blues scale. You're thinking, okay, that's part of the G blues scale, but C works really well. So go ahead and emphasize that. You'll find, okay, well, B flat, 3 draw, half step bend works really well. Well, that's the 7th of this 4 chord blues scale. So what will happen is you don't necessarily have to think about the relationship between the G blues scale and the C blues scale. Your ears are already going to go ahead and tell you that. So you'll do that naturally. So what is the key or the main idea about the 4 chord is really think as if, go ahead and just use your G blues scale, but understand that there's some notes you're going to want to go ahead and emphasize. Now what about the 5 chord? The 5 chord actually has exactly the same relationship. The G blues scale has all of the notes that the 5 chord blues scale or the D blues scale has, with exception of 2 notes. So what we have is the G blues scale itself is this super scale that we can use over the entire 12-measure blues progression. The 5-4-1 transition. Now, the 5-4-1 transition happens right here at the 5, the 4, and the 1. Now, the principle behind this place right here, this measure to the first beat of the next measure is, when we were on the 1 chord, we had 4 measures to develop whatever we wanted to develop. The 4 chord, we had some statements, a little bit smaller, not as much time to develop. Then the 1 chord, we can go ahead and reiterate maybe some of the ideas that we had on the 1 chord. What happens on the 5 chord is chord change happens so fast that we don't have as much freedom. We have to walk a little bit stronger or closer to the chord change. So these tend to be more root-oriented. So we don't necessarily think of much of a blues scale pattern per se on the 5-4-1, but think more roots. Remember I said the G blues scale was kind of this magic scale that we can use over the 4 chord and 5 chord? Because the 5 chord blues scale, most of the notes are already in the G blues scale, and most of the notes of the 4 chord blues scale are already in the G blues scale. So what will happen is for the 5 chord, we're going to use D. That's the root for the 5 chord. For the 4 chord, we're going to use C. That's the root for the 4 chord. And we're going to go ahead and resolve it on the downbeat of the first, on that 11th measure, on the first beat with G. Let's go ahead and listen how that happens. Okay, from the top, we're on the 1 chord now. Here comes the 4 chord. Now the 1 chord. Okay, get ready. 1, 2, 4, drop. Blow. 2. Now, again, because the chords are changing so fast, we want to go ahead and keep the notes fairly tight, not really develop too much in that area. Let's go ahead and do it again. I'm going to go ahead and use the root note again. I'm going to spice it up a little bit. Okay, here we are. 1, 2, ready, go. Now, that was a lot nicer, but I still did the same thing. 4 draw, 4 blow, 2 draw. Now, the 5-4-1, remember that you can really emphasize any part that you want. Remember the D chord, D, F sharp, A, C? What if I was to do a little turn here and start on A, 3 draw whole step bend, that's the 5th of the 5 chord, And then for the 4 chord, go ahead and go to G. That'd be 2 draw. That's the 5th of the 4 chord. And then go ahead and do a little turn and just return back to 2 draw for the 1 chord. Now this is very theoretical in the sense of how we build a solo, but I'm just giving you an idea that those chord tones are still there for us to use if we want to. So let me play the same thing. I'm going to play 3 draw, whole step bend, 2 draw, do a little turn, and then just right back to the 2 draw. Okay, you ready? 1, 2, 3. Works pretty well. Now the other thing we can do is it just happens to be that this change does allow us to use a little bit more of the 5-chord blues scale, the D blues scale. So the D blues scale is D, F, G, A flat, A, C, D. Let's talk about the harmonica. 4 draw, 5 draw, 6 blow, 6 draw bend, 6 draw, 7 blow, 8 draw. So I'm going to go ahead and do a D blues scale starting right here, and I'm just going to work my way right through the 4 chord, ignoring that the 4 chord even exists. I'm going to drive right through it and just finish on the root note for the 1 chord. Let's see how that sounds. Okay, you're ready. 1, 2, ready, go. I just did a straight blues scale and went right back down. 4 draw, 5 draw, 6 blow, 6 draw bend, 6 draw, 7 blow, 8 draw, back down to 4 draw, and then hit 3 blow, 6 blow right on the downbeat of the 11th measure. So options, let's review a little bit. 5-4-1 transition happens right at the downbeat of the 9th measure and resolves on the downbeat of the 11th measure. See how this comes over into the first beat? So the answer really happens all the way to the end, which would be the downbeat of the 11th measure. We can either just use root notes, 5-chord root note, 4-chord root note, 1-chord root note. We can move around those root notes to make different ideas and still have to resolve the G somehow, whether it's 2 draw, 6 blow, or 9 blow. Or we can bully through the 4 chord and just pretend it's not there. Now, how can we pretend that this chord is not there? Well, if the listener is focused on you as a harmonica player, you can pretty much push through any change that you want because they're focused on you. So if you're driving really hard through a solo, they're not going to be listening to make sure that every note matches within your solo. So you can go ahead and start with the D blues scale, build all the way up, and then as long as you're there on the downbeat of the 11th measure to resolve it for the 1 chord, you've done your job for the 5-4-1 transition. The turnaround. Now the turnaround, we've done everything so far except these last 2 measures. Now, with the turnaround, what we're going to do is the idea of the turnaround is it's a question. We leave room for the 5-4-1 transition to finish, and then we have the turnaround to bring us back. So it turns us back around to the very beginning of the blues progression. So really what it is it's a question. Boom. Ready to move on to something different. So any type of question that you would normally use in this question and answer area, you can go ahead and use as a turnaround if you want. Now, another way to treat the turnaround is to use it as a build-up. Instead of just asking a question, maybe you can do, then the next part of the solo happens. So I'm going to let the music roll. I'm going to do 24 measures. I'm going to go ahead and do a turnaround that just asks a question. Listen and get an idea of how it feels to you. Then I'm going to go through and just do a little more soloing again. Then I'm going to do the turnaround where it actually builds up. It's not really a question. It's a building up of this next 1 chord stuff that I'm going to do here. Let's take a listen to it. both worked well. The build-up was kind of nice because it really kind of got me into really hit it heavy on the one chord. You can do patterns, triplet patterns, like... Let me put that in context. 5 chord. Works pretty nice, doesn't it? So some type of build up to ready for the next phrase. And that's what the turnaround can do. Let's now review the entire 12-bar blues phrasing scheme. Okay, let's review this a little bit. What I've done is I put on the board a common scheme of how a soloist might look at 12-bar blues. We've got question, answer, repeat of that question and answer. Now, I'm going to add something to that second question and answer. There's no reason why I actually have to repeat it exactly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it just a little bit. Now, the neat thing about changing it just a little bit is the listener has already been presented that first phrase, the question and answer. If I change it a little bit, I'd go up to this note instead of that note. They're going to go, okay, that was cool. I like how you did that. Because the idea is you've already presented the lick. You're going to present the lick again. And you're going to change it a little bit. Statement. It's going to resolve down. Actually, the beginning of the question will be the resolvement of these statements. And then the answer, again, question, answer is going to be repeated from there. I might change it a little bit, depends on how I feel. We have the 5-4-1 transition, and then the turnaround is going to bring us back at the top. I'm going to play it twice, just so you can really get a sense of how this questions and answers work. Bar blues. Constructing your solo. What we have now is we have questions, answers, statements, turnarounds, 5-4 transitions. Now, how are we going to remember all these ideas as we're soloing? Well, what happens is we actually go through a lick, and when playing that lick, we're going to go through our criteria that we talked about before. And what was that criteria? We took that lick, listened to it, find out why we thought it was cool. Why do we do that? Because if there's some notes that are emphasized that make it sound the way it does, you want to make sure you emphasize those as well. Also, second of all, when you learn that lick, you're going to learn it in pieces so that you have the entire overall lick really down. And those little pieces will usually be a phrase start, phrase end, phrase start, phrase end. Very small ones, then you've got your full lick. After you've got the lick, find out what chord it was on, because the idea is you want to learn it on the chord and apply it to the chord when you solo. Learn what came into it and what came out of it. So the idea is, how was that lick built up? And that's going to be important when we talk about these shelves in just a minute, is how did they build into that lick? Because that build up is what's going to remind you of that lick later. Then, make sure you put it into context. Play it with the CD, make it your favorite lick for the next 2 weeks. Because if you don't play it a lot and really use it in your playing, it's not your lick yet. So you learned it from this guy, but you played for a couple weeks. It's committed to long-term memory. Now it's your lick. You put the emphasis that you want to put on it to make it your style. Now, this board demonstrates what you learn. After playing a lick for 2 weeks, it's yours. You'll always remember it. And what happens is you get this stack of licks over time. And the longer you play, the more licks you get. Basically, the more lick vocabulary that you have. Now, on the 4-chord, we also have some 4-chord licks, and we have some 1-chord licks coming back that could be the same as this, maybe a little bit shorter. Now, the 5-4-1 transition, what's neat about this area here is you can memorize just 2 5-4-1 transitions, and in general, it'll sound very good. Also, your turnaround. Just memorize 2 turnarounds. You'll do just fine. Now, if you want to stand out as an artist as having a very as being diverse on your 5-for-1 transitions, I would really recommend as much as possible to really try to make this stand out, because the 5 chord really is the high point when soloing in 12-bar blues. So you can just memorize 2 and use them most of the time, and it works okay, because you can put all of your variety on the 1-chord licks. But think if you want to be a little different than the other artists, add some more pizzazz to that 5-for-1 transition. And the turnarounds as well. Remember, that's going to set up the next lick to come. So the next 12 bars, that next big phrase section, you want to make sure your turnaround is very innovative. Okay, so how it works is when you have a lick, at the end of that lick, this turn happens and it reminds you of the next 4 chords you're going to play. Now, how this works is, I think many of us have certain smells or tastes or any other extra sensory sense that we have that reminds us of a place or time that we were before. And the same idea works when soloing. When you learned a lick, remember we learned the lick that came before it and the lick that came after it? Well, say you did a 1-chord lick. You chose something, and the turn happened, and all of a sudden, hey, that reminded you of the 4-chord lick that you played. Let me give you an example. Say that was a lick, and I did something before that that used that same turn. Well, guess what? It's going to remind me of that next 4-chord lick. And that's how that lick comes. So what happens is we choose our first lick, and then as we're finishing that lick, it reminds us of that lick. Then after playing that lick, we start moving up to the high end, and okay, well, 6th blow. Then we're going to play that lick that bases itself off the 6th blow. Then after doing that, it's going to remind you of this lick. So you're going to go ahead and play this lick, and then this 5-for-1 transition, the way that it ends, reminds you of this turnaround. And what happens is you have these memories of these different stacks of licks that we've learned over time. These are the different shelves that we're working with. And what happens is at the end of this lick, it's going to remind us of something else we've done before, whether it was in practice or you're performing or you're just trying to make something up, and that lick appears. And that's really how soloing works in that sense. Now, the important part is really the first lick. If anything about phrasing to remember, the first thing you say sets the tone for the entire 12-measure progression. So it's like when you walk in a room, you greet somebody. How you greet them, your eye contact, everything that goes into it is going to kind of set the mood for the conversation that's going to follow. This is exactly the same thing. Because remember when we went to the board, we did a question, answer, repeat the question, the answer, statements. Then we repeated the question and the answer. Then we did the 5-for-1 transition and the turnaround. Well, guess what? The 4-chord, the 5-for-1 transition, and the turnaround, those all followed the theme or the feel or the dynamic sense of what you did for the first lick. So really the very first one is very important that you choose that one carefully. And sometimes it's as simple as wherever you're at on the harmonica, say you end up on 3, you're going to do a lick that starts on 3 draw. So it's kind of just an evolving process as you solo on the instrument. Let's now talk a little bit more of ideas of how to work either with an entire song instead of specifically within 12 measures. And let's go ahead and look at a different way of actually soloing on the harmonica over 12 measures. Instead of breaking them up into questions and answers and these different phrases, we're going to use a larger repeat scheme. 4-bar phrases. Now, before we looked at how we can do a question, answer, statement, question, answer, 5-4 in transition, there's a lot that went through making a 12-measure solo. Well, there's a different way to look at it. Remember we said the G blues scale is really important in the sense that the G blues scale embodies most of the notes in the 4-chord blues scale and the 5-chord blues scale. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of run through the idea of chords. In the sense, if we look at the board here, I'm going to play 4 measures on this 1 chord. It could be a question, 2-measure answer, or it could be a 2-measure question, 2-measure answer. Then what I'm going to do is on the 4 chord, you see the little red marking I put there. I put a natural sign to kind of mark where those phrases are going to be. You're going to go ahead and play that same phrase all the way through for 4 measures. And then on the 5 chord, we're going to repeat the same thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to repeat that 4-measure phrase 3 times. So we'll have 4-measure phrase, repeat it again, and then we're ready for the next portion. I just want you to listen to it first and see if you can hear how it does work. Works pretty well, doesn't it? And all I was doing is I was repeating that phrase 3 times. And again, we're just kind of forgetting the idea of chord change. Remember we talked about before on the 5 chord, how we can just bull through that 4 chord right there? Start the D blues scale, bull right through the 4 chord, and get right on the 1 chord on the 11th measure. We're kind of doing the same thing. We're telling the listener, listen, I'm going to take you somewhere. Forget a little bit about what the band is. Follow me. And that's what this 4-measure phrasing is all about. Now, the great thing about this one is I'm only playing 1 lick. So for the other one, I did question, answer, question, changed, answer, 4-chord statements, there's a new lick. Maybe I'll play something new on the next 2 measures, then I got to do a new 5-4-1, a new transition. So the transitions and turnarounds and the questions and answers, a lot of that stuff does change. So how many licks am I using up? Especially if you're doing something that's fairly fast, you're going to use a lot of licks. So with this 4-measure phrasing idea, we can only pick 1 lick and repeat it. And it still sounds good, and guess what? You're not running out of things to do. I know a lot of players out there, after about 24 measures of solo, and it's like, I've run out of all my ideas on the instrument. So with this, if I think you know 5, 6 licks, if you know 5 or 6 licks, well, guess what? You can do 5 or 6 12-measure phrases, an entire instrumental just on 5, 6 ideas. Now, the other neat thing about this, just like we worked with the question and the answer, is you can go ahead and present a question, present an answer, and the next time you do it, change it a little bit. They're going to say, okay, that's cool. I was listening to that. I can hear what he changed. Let me give you an example. I presented the lick. By the way, I'm using a B-flat harmonica. We do it one more time. Listen carefully. Next time. Well, what did I do differently? I added a little bit of a texture of the upper note. Sounded nice, didn't it? But you knew exactly what I did because I really didn't stray too far away from the original line. Let me give you another example of the same line. Again, very nice, but stepping a little bit further out. But this one actually stays fairly close to the original thematic idea. You can actually move fairly far out. You just got to be careful that you're not losing your sense of what the phrase is, because the idea is it's a repeated pattern. Let me play the same example with the CD now. Okay, get ready. 4 measures. Same example. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. Nice, wasn't it? You were really following along with me. Again, the idea is really to engage the listener when you're doing these 4-measure phrases. Now, if you do a lick, you can actually do a question, and an answer, and you might have about 3 to 6 beats left over. And if you choose a lick like that, what's nice is that can be your variety, basically, that you're going to use. So let me do a 4-measure phrase. I've got 7 beats left. So whatever I do in there can be my fun time. So let me go ahead and give you 7 beats. Okay, ready? 2, 1, 2, ready, go. Nice. That gave me a lot of room to move, didn't it? So the idea is you can actually repeat that line many times, but when repeating that line, it's that extra little bit of time that you can use to add whatever insight that you want to that particular groove. I really like 4-measure phrases because, again, you're really economizing how many licks you need to use. You get to spend more time thinking about the tone quality and what you're actually going to use in that lick, and then you get to play around with it, and guess what? The listener gets to play around with it with you. Soloing blocks. The idea behind soloing blocks is on our harmonica, we move across and use the entire range of the instrument. And the idea is when you walk down specific notes into a certain range of your harmonica, I want to know as a harmonica player that I can stay there as long as I want and still be able to create 12 measures, 24 measures, 36 measures, and make them sound good and not repetitive. So with that idea, we really need to take advantage of the different parts of our harmonica and understand them a little bit better. Let's look at the first through third hole soloing block. Now, the idea of the soloing block is that we focus in on 3 holes. Actually, it can be any note combination, but for this one, we're going to focus on the first through third hole. So what we have on the blow is C, E, G. The draw is D, G, B. Well, 6 notes. There's not really much we can do with 6 notes, is there? Well, there's more notes available. How many notes do you think there are? There's actually 12 notes available, including all the root notes. So what we have is 6, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, let's think about the first thing we want to do is think about where the root notes are so that when we play a 12-bar blues, we have somewhat of a some marking place that we can work within. So if we were playing a C harmonica in the key of G, 2 draw would be G. So that's our root note for the 1 chord. Then our root note for the 4 chord will be C, G, A, B, C. Then the root note for the 5 chord would be D, G, A, B, C, D. So 1 chord, 4 chord, and the 5 chord. And you can use anything in between that you want that you think that sounds good. Now, this exercise, I want you to play this soloing block for 3 weeks, at least 3 weeks, only using that soloing block. If you use this soloing block for a couple days, you're not going to get it. The idea is to really, even if you had some tape off the rest of the harmonica. And what's going to happen is you're going to get so comfortable using all the bends, moving around the notes, finding what notes sound good, what notes don't sound good, that it's really going to help you become very proficient on the low end. It's also going to do 2 other things. Because there's a limitation of notes, you have to work your phrasing better. You're going to get better at phrasing. Also, your bending is going to get much better. So just the overall sense of musicianship on the instrument is really going to be helped by using this. So let's use somewhat of a soloing theme to help us through this. Now, a soloing theme is basically trying to take one idea and letting that idea dominate throughout the entire song. Say if we had a big, big white wall and you were given a paint palette and say, okay, paint, make me a masterpiece. Well, it's kind of hard because you don't have any theme, like what do you want me to paint? And the idea with this is we're going to pick a specific idea to kind of help us guide through the solo. Not a difficult idea, actually a fairly simple idea so that our mind is free to go ahead and solo. We're going to use notes. Since we don't have many notes available, let's just focus on one and kind of have the other notes support that note. So we're going to start with G, 2 draw. Then, listen to me carefully, on the next solo I'm going to go ahead and use B, 3 draw, a little bit bent. Then the next solo I'm going to use F as a focus. And then the next solo I'm going to use 1 draw as my focus. And my goal is not to have repeated notes. Now, don't use all your notes right away. Basically, don't show them everything you have in the first 12 measures, because guess what? There's nowhere to go. So be careful that you don't use too many of these notes right away, because it leaves you nowhere to go. Let's review that again. I'm going to go G, which is the root of the 1 chord. I'm going to go to B, which is the 3rd of the 1 chord. I'm then going to do a solo on F, which is the 7th of the 1 chord. Then I'm going to use D as my focus, and that's the 5th of the 1 chord. Okay, ready? Three. Two draw bend. One draw. combination. Not bad. It didn't sound too repetitive, did it? A couple times you can tell that I was losing a little bit of what notes I had available to me. But in general, if you weren't focusing on the idea that I'm only using the first 3 holes, it really is a good technique. So one thing you also want to think about is what techniques are available to you on the instrument. Well, if I have the first 3 holes, what techniques do we have? Well, we have articulation, we have bends, we have dips, we've got vibratos. What about tongue slaps? Well, I could slap on the 3-blow, but that's not necessarily an important thing. How about shakes? 2-draw, 3-draw shake? Not really any shakes available. Mostly it's just pitch that we have to work with. Let's now talk about the 1st through 4th hole soloing blocks. Okay, we're now 3 weeks later. You've done your 1st through 3rd. Your phrasing's better. Your sense of chord change is better. Your sense of just that bottom part of the harmonica. Okay, let's add how many notes? 1, 2, 3 notes. Now, we had 12 notes. How would 3 more notes really open up our soloing? Well, watch what happens. A lot more techniques are available. So, list the technique. I now have what? I have an octave, C and C, 1-blow, 4-blow. I have an octave, D and D, 1-draw, 4-draw. Now, I can either play it boom-bop, boom-bop, boom, or actually put my tongue in the middle and play it as an actual octave embouchure. I also have, well, look at this. I got shakes, 3-draw, 4-draw. I also have 3-draw with a combination of a little bit of 4-draw. I also have more of the blues scale, don't I? D, D-flat, C, B-flat, G. And look, G, F, D, D-flat, C. I have a lot of the blues scale available. Look at all the techniques we now have available with just the addition of 3 holes. Okay, we're going to spend 3 weeks on this, right? Now, I'm just going to give you an example. I'm not going to solo as long, but listen to what the 4th hole has to offer for us. Let's see. The first one, I'll go ahead and play octaves, and I'll move between those notes. The second one, I'm going to go ahead and use more of the blues scale. Actually, the second one, I'm going to use a texture. 3-draw with a little bit of 4-draw. Then I'm going to go ahead and use more of the blues scale. And listen how much has really opened up to me. Texture. A lot more available, wasn't there? So the first one I used octaves. The second one I used a combination of 3-draw, 4-draw. The next one I just used as much of the blues scale as I possibly could. There's a lot available to me. You notice a lot of the time I used 4-measure phrases. So I repeated, did 1 lick over 4 measures, then I repeated it the next 4 measures. What was one of the traits of 4-measure phrasing? Well, the 4-bar phrases, the idea is we can only have to use 1 lick. So 1 lick compared to maybe 5 or 6 licks we'd use in normal phrasing. That sounds good because we're limited in what we can do. So go ahead and really take advantage of that 4-measure phrasing. Now, 1st through 5th hole. We're now 3 weeks later. We only have 2 more notes available to us. Well, there isn't a lot of techniques, but we have the 2-draw, 5-draw embouchure, that nice thick embouchure from the 4-hole octave side. We have the 2-blow, 5-blow E. We have the 4-draw, 5-draw shake. We got the 4-draw with a little bit of 5-draw. We have more of the blues scale. Let me give you a very short example of the 5 now used in context. A lot available, isn't there? So you don't really need to do this for 3 weeks. This is something just to kind of get the idea of how the harmonica builds up. Do it for about a week, but only that for a week. The idea is, how can we really use that fifth hole to our advantage? Now, let's go up to the sixth hole. What we now have is a complete blues scale, G to G. We also have available to us the six-draw bend, so that'd be the ninth if we're thinking in a relationship to the root. Root, third, fifth, seventh, ninth. The ninth sounds kind of jazzy. That's a good hole to use. Be careful how much you use that, though. It's not used very often by blues harmonica players, so reserve that for very special spots. Now, let's go ahead and move on to the high end. The soloing block on the high end is probably as important as your first through third hole soloing block. So if we look from the sixth hole to the 10th hole, what techniques are available? Well, we have bending. You want to be careful with that bend right there. I wouldn't use 8-blow in your high-end second position playing. We've got the 10-blow bend. That really grabs a lot of attention. That's a good thing about the high end. What other techniques? Some octaves, not many octaves, because we'll have to use the bottom range to do that. Let's see. Shakes. Well, I could do like a D-F shake, just like we did the D-F shake on the 4-draw, 5-draw. Now, the high end is a place we don't use very often. So why don't we use octave substitution to help us create licks? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a couple examples of a lick from here, and I'm going to move it up to the high end. G, B, D, E, G. G, B, D, E, G. I'll even throw a little bit of 6-draw in there, because if you go 2-draw, dip to 3, makes it sound a little bit smoother. I can go. Even though I can't bend, it recreates this bend down and up to the 3-draw relationship. So here's a lick now. So forget about the low end now. Go ahead and play the high end. Now, for the high end stuff, keep on copying licks from your low end and move it up to the high end. I'm just going to take some low end licks and I'm going to go ahead and pop up to the high end for you. There's a lot available to you. So use your lower range of the harmonica. Why? Because you know the lick, you know the timing, you know the dynamics, you know the way it's supposed to sound. You know the pitches that you're supposed to use. Now what you just have to get used to is moving it up to the high end. All you have to get used to is these new notes you're not as familiar with. Octave substitution is a real powerful tool for a harmonica player because we don't normally think in notes. We normally use our ears, which is okay, but let's use our brain a little bit to help us in our soloing ideas. So on the high end, spend how long? 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. The high end is a pretty high, difficult thing to use. So 4 weeks would be probably enough time to really get used to the high end. I'm going to just play a couple measures of the high end now. Soloing themes. Before we looked at some different ideas of how to specifically solo within 12 measures. We're now going to move outside of 12 measures and think how we're actually going to develop an entire song or instrumental piece. Now, if we're thinking about an instrumental piece, the first thing we need to think about is how are we going to make that song different than all the other 12-bar blues songs out there. The one difficult part about blues is it is 12-bar blues, and really the only way to add variety is by the groove that the guitarist or the rest of the band lays down, what the singer is doing. If there's no singer, then it's just up to you as a harmonica player to add interest. Well, there needs to be some type of introduction to saying, hey, this is my song. And the head has got to be something that maybe would be flashy, but you need to be careful. If it's too flashy in the beginning, you're going to maybe use up all the notes that you're going to try to present throughout the song. So maybe something simple and definitely needs to be repeated. The idea of being repeated is that you can go back to the end and the person really hears it as the head or the theme. Let me give you an example of this one. Again, with the B-flat harmonica, I'm going to do a repeated pattern, and at the end of the solo, the idea is I would go back to this. And notice how you can kind of groove along with it very quick. And that's the idea of the head. You want the person going home and whistling this after the end of the evening. Now you're free to solo. Then at the end of the song, you come back to the head. So it's your introduction and it's your outro. And in general, if you're going to write a song, and that's the idea why we're here, is we're trying to think of soloists how to make different ideas and how to really expand our ability in soloing. Well, you want to think of a head. So make your head very, very important. Another couple examples. So the head doesn't necessarily have to be something that's 12 measures. It could be something that just kind of opens a song. We'll talk about openings fairly soon. Now, soloing blocks. We're going to use soloing blocks as a soloing theme. Again, the idea of they have this big white wall, and someone gives you paints and says, okay, go. Well, let's go ahead and use a real simple theme to help us as we start from the song and move through. Okay, I'm going to start with a head. I'm going to use the same one that I just used. I'm going to go ahead and then do a 1 through 3 soloing block, then a 1 through 4 soloing block. The next 12 measures will be a 1 through 5. Next 12 measures will be a 1 through 6. The next 12 measures will be a 7 through 10. I'm going to come back to my head. Now the idea is it's kind of a progressing the notes up as I go up on the instrument, and that's what we're going to use. So starting from the very top with the head, then 1st through 3rd, 1st through 4th, 1st through 5th, 1st through 6th, 7 through 10. Okay, 1st through 3rd. First through 4th. First through 6. 1, 2, high end. Okay, here's another soloing theme, long and short. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do short pieces. Then the next 12 measures, I'm going to do something long and end it short. Then I'm going to do long flowing lines. Then I'm going to do chugs, and then something thick and intense. The idea of building somehow. So, short. Now, long and short. Then long and flowing. Doesn't actually have any spaces. Chugs, just be something. Something that uses something thick, and then just thick and intense, real heavy. Okay, you ready? C harmonica. Okay, something short. Okay, now long and then shorter. Now, long and flowing. Chugs. So, we stopped and didn't use the thick and intense, but I think you got the idea. 4-measure phrases. Something we haven't talked about is fast blues. Let's listen to this example. This is 200 beats per minute. 4 chord. 1. 5. Back to the 1. Turn around. Now, the band gets faster as they go on. Now, are you just going to go off and play as many licks as you can? Well, let's try it. Okay, listen to how many licks I'm going to put in here. Now, not bad, but that was cooking, wasn't it? Now, you already heard some repeated licks. Well, guess what? After 24 measures, 36 measures, you're going to hear a lot of repeated licks. The listener's going to get bored. I'm going to get bored because I'm using the same stuff over and over. What if we do a technique called doubling? Instead of thinking of 4 measures, think of it as 2 measures. So the beat is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's just think 1 and 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, chord change. So what happens is instead of 4 measures, we're thinking it's 2 measures, which effectively slows us down by half. So we can actually solo more smoothly, not necessarily have to cram all these ideas into it. Let's count along with it. Ready? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Change. 1, 2, 3, 4. Change. 1, 2, 3, 4. Change. 1, 2, change. 1, 2, change. 1, 2, change. 1, 2. Go. Now, it seems kind of fast, but actually is half the speed as what I just played. Let me give you a quick example, then we're going to go ahead and go through this soloing theme here. 1, 2, 1, 2. Much smoother, wasn't it? I wasn't fighting the music. So playing it basically half speed, but makes the progression go by twice as fast. Now, 4-measure phrases, we talked about how you'd play 4 measures, repeat the 4 measures, then repeat the 4 measures. What if we just did 4 measures, repeat the 4 measures, then did something new on the 5-4-1 transition and turnaround? That's actually probably the most common way that soloists treat music. 4-measure phrase, repeat that 4-measure phrase with some type of variation, and then we got the 5-4-1. So in this soloing theme, I'm going to use doubling. I'm going to do doubling twice. I'm going to use 4 measures, repeat 4 measures, and then 5-4-1 transition. I'm going to do whatever I want. I'm going to do that twice. I'm going to go back, and I'm going to go ahead and play 4-measure phrases where I'm going to repeat it 3 times. So I've got 4 measures, repeat it 4 measures, repeat it 4 measures. And listen how it's going to start to build. And for this fast soloing, it works pretty well. This is an E-flat harmonica. We're playing in the key of B-flat. Okay, we're going to go from the top. Get ready. Anything I want. Same thing. Anything. That was a much better way of presenting a fast blues, wasn't it? Felt like I had control. Now, if I wanted to keep on going on with this soloing theme, what could I do? I can go ahead and maybe just play as many licks as I can. Forget about the 4-measure phrase and just go lick, 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 and then you're probably going to need to end that. Song forms. So far, we've talked about how to solo within 12 measures. And we've talked about how to solo outside of 12 measures, basically how to construct an entire song. Now, what we need to think about a little bit more is how do we introduce a song? How do we add variety to the middle of the song, such as using breaks? And how do we end a song? Well, let's talk about the introduction. Now, what we could do is we can play the first 4 measures only harmonica, then the band comes in on the 4 chord. Well, the nice thing about that is we actually have the harmonica in the front, no other band yet. So they really know, hey, this is a harmonica song. Now, I can't play an example here because the musicians need to watch you. They need to know, boom, when to come in on the 4 chord. Let's talk about starting from the 5. Now, starting from the 5, if we think about the 5-4-1 transition, that's where the band is going to start, and you'll start with it. What's nice about this is if you just start from the very beginning, I'll give you an example. Here's a track that just starts from the top. If someone was just to start jamming, how would you know what to play on your first couple notes? That's a good example of how you could mess up easily. Now, the 5, starting from the 5, gives you 4 measures of kind of moving around to get the feel of the song, and right when the 1 chord comes in, you're ready to solo. So I'm going to give you an example. And actually, remember the 5-4-1, you can kind of use the same stuff over and over. You don't necessarily have to have a lot of diversity. Well, you can go ahead and use that and just play some standard 5-4-1 transition that you use all the time, and the turnaround, and it works pretty well. So here's an example of starting from the 5. 5, 4, and 1. 1, 2, 1 chord. So now I've got a good feel for the song and I'm ready to solo. So I'm going to play a generic 5-for-1 transition with this. Now, I wouldn't have been able to do a solo like that if I didn't have some type of introduction. And what I do for the 5-for-1, I just went 4 draw, 4 blow, 3 draw, 2 draw. Didn't really do too much. So starting from the 5 is a very, very common way. Now also, if you want to be the harmonica player and really be up front, then maybe doing 12 measures by yourself would be a good option. Now if you do 12 measures by yourself, you kind of want to tell the band what groove you're going to do. So if you do 12 measures, don't just go off and solo, maybe play a bass line. And the idea of the bass line is you're giving the bass player his line. And you, because of that, are creating the feel that the band is going to give you. So it's kind of nice. Musically, you're telling the band what type of feel you want. Because sometimes it's hard to verbalize that. Example. Well, guess what the bass player is going to do? He's going to play exactly the same line that you played. Not bad for, again, being able to communicate with what you want the band to do. Breaks. Now, breaks happen to basically just break up the song so that in the middle of a section, or maybe it's used as part of the head, the idea is when music is going, just keeps on going, to actually have some type of break or focal point really help break it up. So let's get an example of a break. Now, most commonly, the break is going to happen on the first 4 measures. 1, 2, ready, go, break. 2, 3, 4, break. 2, 3, 4, break. 2, 3, 4. 4 chord, and everybody is in on the 4 chord. Let me give you an example of that. That's the first break. Second break. Third break. Here's the fourth. Now, here the band's going to lead us into the 4 chord. So they're back to their normal playing. I'm going to go ahead and play with them. Here's 1 draw, 2 draw bend, 1 draw, 2 draw bend, 2 draw. Ba-do, ba-do, dot. Okay, get ready. 1, 2, ready. Now, the idea of the break is you can either play the break yourself if someone else is occupying that space, or you can play the space. If you're the soloist, that's your time to play. Now, this one actually does a break, then 2 measures. Break, 2 measures, break, 2 measures. It's also common to go ba-do-ba-do-da, ba-ba-dum, ba-do-ba-do-da, ba-ba-dum, and actually stay within that 12-bar blues format, the first 4 measures. So really what they're doing is they're taking the 4 measures and they're making it now 8 measures in the beginning. There's nothing wrong with that. Basically, they're elongating it. Okay, let me give you an example of this. I'm going to play the middle of the break. Don't freak out when you get this big space. Keep the rhythm inside your body. Move your body. Really setted the harmonica off very well, didn't it? Now, endings. The idea of an ending is, the cool thing about blues is, you know, we use this 12-measure format that repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats. Well, that sounds kind of boring. Well, the idea is that the background progression remains the same so that the soloist has complete freedom over what they're going to do. So basically, the soloist is king. Now, endings, there's actually one ending that's the most common. There's a couple other types you can definitely use, and it's more of you and your band decide some other nice, cool ways to end it. But the most common way to end it is after the 5-for-1 transition. Example, 5, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4, stop. Now, you're going to come on the and of the 11th measure. Ba-da, ba, bum ba da ba da ba da da da. Band in. So the band's going to come in on the 12th measure on the second beat. So it'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Break 2, 3, 4. 1. Be-ya. And you put your line in that. You can pretty much use anything as long as it fills up that space. But there's definitely a very common one. 6, 5, 4, 4 blow. 3, 2, bend, 1 draw, 2 draw. Then you play with the bend, you go 2 draw, bend. Or root, flat 7th. Let's listen to an example of this. G harmonica. Okay, 1 chord. 1 more measure. Okay, here comes the 5 chord. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4, 2, 3, 4, break. Now, play the 5 with us. Oop, missed it. Let's try that one more time. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. That is definitely the most common way to end. Now, another common way to end, and Paul Butterfield liked to use this one quite a bit, was using the 4 chord. Go 5, 4. But everything at the end pretty much remains the same. You just have to fill in 1 more measure. Really, the idea is there are many ideas to work with. Congratulations on finishing video 3 of Building a Harmonica Technique. I'll see you in video 4, where we'll cover phrasing level 2, tone, positions, and music theory level 2. Let me say goodbye by playing a track out from Blues Harmonica Jam Tracks and Soloing Concepts. Listen carefully. I'm going to use one of those soloing themes that we spoke about.